Hello, and welcome to episode 80 of Prose. This week, lay hands on 2 tornadoes and discover the power of plants in the South. We have so many cool things to announce this week. Firstly, our second short story comes from first-time guest author Jessica Yates, so that's a treat in and of itself. Secondly, the Prose Patreon page has officially launched. I hope that you'll all head over to patreon.com/Prose Podcast and consider becoming a patron of the show. In the same vein, and thirdly, already our very first member to unlock the benefit of an in-show shout-out at the top and bottom of the show has officially pledged at the $10 a month level. Justin McGee, thank you so much for helping me keep going on journeys with all of you wonderful listeners. I am extremely grateful and utterly humbled by your contribution to the Prose community. In addition to Patreon, I would love it if you could go follow the show on social media under @ProsePodcast. Even more amazing would be if you'd head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating and or review for Prose. Ratings and reviews really do help the show. For easiest access to the program, subscribe using Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or whatever podcast catcher is your favorite. Thanks for listening, y'all. Let's get to the tale, shall we? This week, we have Don't Let Her Cry and Jessica Yates's Plants. Enjoy. Don't Let Her Cry, an original short story by Jared I. McGee. Out of the south cometh the whirlwind, and cold out of the north. By the breath of God frost is given, and the breadth of the waters is straitened. Also by watering he wearieth the thick cloud. He scattereth his bright cloud, and it is turned round by his counsels, that they may do whatsoever he commandeth them upon the face of the world and the earth. He causeth it to come, whether for correction, or for his land, or for mercy. Hearken unto this, O child. Stand still and consider the wondrous works of God. Job 37, 9-14. Tasha should have known better after this many years of her bad moods, her volatile temper, her far too caring heart. Now, as she and her mother looked back at the 2 funnel clouds blackening out the sky, screaming their mockery and destroying all in their path, she wished, yet again, that she could better rein in her emotions. Her first memory of uncanny things happening weren't until she was about 11. She thought she'd been invited to Madeline's big 12th birthday party. So it was the surprise of surprises when she, the only girl that didn't wear New Balances and Tommy jeans and blue ivy socks and hair clips to Marblehead Elementary in Marblehead, Arkansas, was not invited after all. Tasha cried and cried. She was legitimately hurt from the exclusion. It was the first time she realized what brand names meant. It was the first time she understood that she and her family didn't have as much as other girls' families. It was the first time her mother had spoken to her like she spoke to adults. And it was the first time she saw the rain as an extension of herself. As her tears poured and poured, even after Mama comforted her and fixed her her favorite dinner, and said she could stay up late on a school night just that once, she kept crying. The tears continued well into the next day, the day of Madeline's party, that enviable Friday evening affair. In fact, Tasha's tears increased in intensity and volume the closer the day came to the start of the soiree. And as those tears and sobs and gasping and grasping at something resembling normalcy in the face of being told she was lesser and not wanted, the weather began to turn from an all-too-blue and sunshiny day to something far grimmer. Rather quickly after school released and those sobs continued in the safety of her room, the skies became dark. The thunder started vibrating the windows in the house. The winds pushed the willow in the yard more than any tree should be pushed without coming down. And the rains. Oh, the rains. The showers that came down that day weren't just a drizzle. No. Deluge didn't even do that rainstorm justice. The meteorologists on TV said that the storm front and rainfall were biblical. Tasha had asked Mama what that meant. Mama had told her it meant sent from God. Tasha had asked Mama if that was a thing, God sending bad to the world. Mama had told her that God works in mysterious ways. Tasha had always thought that God's gifts were meant to be the forces of positivity and happiness, but her gift, her tears bringing down the rain, she didn't quite know about that. On the one hand, Madeline would be punished for being so horrible to her and for labeling her a pariah to her entire school, something that a young woman would have to work to live down. In that case, Tasha bringing the storm seemed very much like God's will. Madeline did bad. She deserved her party to be washed away, a modern-day flood to dissipate the wickedness of mankind. On the other hand, though, that day on the news, Tasha had seen people's homes ruined, with limbs falling onto them, cars washed away in flash floods in town and at the low bridges, entire families brought to their knees just because she was a bit sad. That didn't seem very holy or fair or safe. As she grew up, Tasha continued to feel quite conflicted about her gift. In general, she thought it was good to be different, but not this extremely different. On days when Daddy would come in from his time out on the missionary field, the sun would shine, the temperature would warm, and flowers would bloom, even in the bleakest December. Those days saw people comment on the oddity of the weather, but they did so with smiles as they were heading out into the day with their loved ones to shine in the same way. Tasha shone when her daddy was home. Then there were the days like Madeline's birthday party. Storms that brought Marblehead and the surrounding area to a halt, took them to their knees, made them pray to God to weather the day or the night, or, when things got really bad her junior year of high school, the month. Relationships and boys are what really pushed Tasha to lose her ever-increasing grip on her emotional restraint. Even though from 12 to 27 she'd worked wholeheartedly to take the reins of her mercurial temper and her empathy-heavy heart. Yoga, prayer, running, meditation, chanting, swimming. So many activities to ensure that she could keep a calm heart and an even hand. But fuck, boys. She honestly did not ever remember a time when she wasn't what her friends called boy crazy. However, around 15, that brand of insanity became far more potent. Still, those high school and even the undergrad relationships, though intense and most often ending in tears or hurt or hatred or other forms of bad, did not make her completely go off the rails or abandon her hard-earned serenity. Yoga, prayer, running, meditation, chanting, swimming. They worked. Taylor went and ruined all that. The details of their early relationship had long since blurred across the years. Basically, they'd met at work. She worked at a law firm. He interned for a brief moment. That was enough for them to exchange numbers, go out a couple times, and just after 2 dates, decide to formally and publicly declare they were a couple. Flash forward 4 years, and Taylor and she had broken up after their lives being fully integrated, after they'd moved from Marblehead to Green Forge, from Green Forge to Sundryville, after a dream proposal at Disneyland in Anaheim, after 6 months of engagement, after mutual friends, after she'd already told her dying grandpop that this was going to be her husband, after making career-ending and career-beginning decisions, after melding families, after ups, after downs, after every in-between a life generally throws at a couple. Worst of all, after they had rescued 2 little puppies from a local shelter, weaned them, trained them, and loved them like the little children they were to both Taylor and Tasha. The 2 promised to share the pups, and they did, for a time. But Taylor kept prospering and being promoted, whereas Tasha kept struggling and having to live a very basic, piecemeal existence. In the end, Taylor rightfully argued that he could better support the 2 pups, giving them a comfortable, cushy lifestyle far more easily than she. So, she had to begrudgingly agree to turn them over to him. Adding insult to injury, Tasha had to drive a good 3 hours to meet Taylor to give the loves of her life up. All those promotions had long since taken Taylor away from Arkansas. First to the state capital, then on to Dallas, then Las Vegas, then Los Angeles, and, most recently, back east a bit to Houston. To Taylor's credit, he agreed to meet her in Oklahoma City, hence Tasha only having to drive to OKC rather than Houston. To Taylor's damnation, he was bringing along his new fiancée Florence to pick the pups up. But that is what brought Tasha and her mama and Rosie and Isabel to be racing down this back road with 2 twisters closing in. All the yoga and prayer and running and meditation and chanting and swimming in the world couldn't help unbreak her heart. These dogs had been her entire world for, what was it, 2 straight years now? And now she was giving up her world to a man that had already set her last one to flame and walked away. It was all unfair, and it was all simply too much for her to bear. The day approaching the city was fine, gorgeous even. Her mama had come along as moral support, and the 2 of them tried to love the little dogs as much as humanly possible on the trek. They even stopped at a couple cute rest stops in state parks on the way to Oklahoma City, walking the pups in some of the most beautiful weather to grace that state in May and God knew how long. Tasha didn't think she was that happy. She was feeling anxious and tense. She was feeling nauseous and off. But then again, the weather didn't always leap to her feelings' command. Once they hit the city proper, they stopped at a 7-Eleven to fill up on gasoline, walk the girls again, and grab some snacks for the drive back to Tasha's apartment. That's when it turned. The sirens came bellowing on, howling out across an otherwise silent afternoon for a city. The skies flipped to the eerie, sickly emerald mixed with pea soup green. The locals started bailing out of that store quicker than quick. In other words, for anyone that has grown up around tornadoes, things had gotten serious in a moment. From there, everyone started driving south of the city, knowing that funnel clouds would take a northwest trek up toward Arkansas, Missouri. That is what they always did, after all. But not this time. The two twisters followed Tasha and her mama and Rosie and Isabel as they raced down city streets and back roads and pieces of highway trying to escape those funnel clouds. Tasha weaving past flying debris and cars that had pulled over for people to take cover in ditches or storm cellars known to them. That bobbing and weaving and swerving and sweating and praying lasted for about an hour until the winds started lifting their car and the 2 pulled into a church's chicken, running inside with the dogs in hand, the tornadoes just behind them. There in the church's bathroom, they huddled with the dogs, a Spanish-speaking family and a handful of kind-hearted teenagers that were allowing everyone to take shelter there. As Tasha watched that bathroom full of strangers come together in prayer and fear, her broken heart, though still shattered, warmed a bit. Her mother was crying and praying with the family as best she could in broken Spanish. Rosie and Isabel were shaking and doing their absolute best to be good dogs in this strange environment with those strange people. After about 30 minutes of the outside sounding like a war zone as the tornadoes passed across the store, things went silent. Slowly, the gathered few opened the door and made their way outside. By no means was the storm over, but the immediate danger had passed. The radios were saying that 2 more funnel clouds were in the city. The other 2, in defiance of how tornadoes work, the vast majority of the time, went down toward Texas. The meteorologists couldn't make hide nor hair of it. They called the storm system an act of God. Taylor and Florence had been thrown off course, just as Tasha and her carload had. And they all agreed to meet in a Walmart parking lot that was in an area that wasn't currently underwater. The storms were still raging in the city, so they had to find the sweet spot where they could meet up, do the exchange, and then get out safely. They did, and they did. As Tasha and her mama made their way back to Arkansas, zigzagging through an odd, unflooded path back home, Tasha's mama looked at her and told her that she had to be a bit more careful with her moods. Tasha was floored. This was the first time her mother had ever let on that she knew about Tasha's gift. This was the first time Tasha had ever been able to share with anyone. She asked her mother about why God would do such a thing. Why she would be gifted, cursed, blessed, damned with such a connection to the natural world. Why, honey, it's not that he or we don't ever want to let you cry. Quite the opposite. After all, you've got to have the flood if you want the doves in the rainbow.
In a world in a state, the life is going great. There's a cloud in my mind I can't leave behind.
Thank you for listening to Don't Let Her Cry, a short story by me, Jared I. McGee. All music save one track that you hear come from YouTube's recently launched royalty-free audio library. The tracks you hear are being used under CC 0.1.0 Universal Public Domain Dedication licenses. That other track comes from a previous guest author and a first-time music contributor, the indelible Elizabeth Peterson. Miss Peterson, as many of you know, has appeared on the show as a voice actor a couple times now. Miss Peterson is an educator, mathematician, and playwright who can be found between New England, Scotland, and Canada. She likes logic and words, and her favorite words are
syzygy, eleemosynary,
and
logodedaily.
You can read her theater reviews and thoughts on the world at her website, mathematicalmedievalist.wordpress.com. Next up this week, we have our first of a series of themed stories from guest author Jessica Yates. Please do stick around for a bit of Southern charm in plants.
Clouds away, those clouds away, but they keep coming, yeah, they keep running, 'cause they wanna stay, I'll weather the storm and find beauty in a cloudy day. The wind keeps blowing, wind keeps blowing, I'll weather the storm and find beauty in a cloudy day.
Plants, a short story by Jessica Yates. She had never been very good with plants, an irony she recognized considering she was now sharing much of her living space with greenery. She had a cactus from the grocery store as a child, and once, when she was sick, her mother brought home a bonsai tree for her. She couldn't recall either of the unlucky plants living very long. There was no way they had flourished in any way, at least. Yet she continued her attempts to foster a green thumb that she was convinced existed within her. Her great-grandmother seemed to be the roots of her supposed hereditary talent for plants. Memories of her at their homely country cottage where she was always covered in leaves and petals from pruning her gardens blended into her more recent life in the nursing home. Her small patio overflowed with vibrant tendrils and roses, while her neighbors struggled to keep simple sunflowers alive in the full Arkansas sun. While her health still allowed it, she would sit on the patio, wearing one of a dozen old-fashioned breezy dresses she owned, and admire the small paradise she had spun with her skilled hands, like God as he created Eden and saw that it was good. In her mind, her great-grandmother served as the matriarch of verdant brilliance for her family. In turn, her grandmother inherited those botanical instincts and instilled them within her own daughters. So why shouldn't she have the same affinity with plants? It made sense to believe she would. When she would play in the backyard as a child, her mother would be up to her elbows in weeds and soil for hours every Saturday morning in the spring and summer seasons. She only ceased her sweaty, love-induced labor as the temperatures quickly soared into the 90s by mid-morning. As the heat and humidity intensified, slightly audible laments of "Phew! It's getting hot out here!" would likewise increase as patches of sweat appeared through her dirty t-shirt. For all her efforts, she was rewarded with a small but overflowing garden that traced the perimeter of their home's carport and driveway. Vibrant pink roses could be seen peeking over the fence as they longed to reach the sun. A massive lantana bush, once diminutive enough to fit in a small clay pot, claimed an entire corner of the garden as its own. Many gardening mornings, her mother had to spend the bulk of her time just fighting back that brightly colored, incessantly growing beast. When her father built her a pergola, her mother planted vines and trained them to climb the four corners. She thrilled at watching them expand, wrapping their nearly translucent green bodies around the wooden columns and curling their tendrils and leaves throughout the wooden gaps above. By the time the next summer came around, the deceptively strong little vines provided a substantial amount of shade beneath them. She and her mother enjoyed many warm, quiet breakfasts of local donuts and orange rolls under their cover while she visited home on the weekends during college. Her parents had since moved away from her childhood home with its meticulous but overflowing gardens. Her mother's new garden consisted of more leafy green bushes and plants and the colorful arrangements of past care. A path of roughly cut stepping stones wound its way from the back deck to the midst of the backyard. Certainly more garden than yard, considering only a small patch of it remained vacant of greenery aside from the native grass. It was most like a tropical jungle, as much as a jungle could exist in South Arkansas. Her mother often despaired over the fact that she had to abandon the floral symphony she had composed in the old home. Seeing as that house was on the same highway as her grandparents' house, her mother could steal glimpses of the front gardens as she passed by. The property now belonged to a newly married young couple, the wife of a future graduate of the local university and the husband a newly trained engineer of some sort. To her mother, both were incapable of taking on the responsibility of caring for her carefully crafted living masterpieces. Assigned the times and the dying skill of artful gardening, her mother supposed. Such determination often made her mother hesitate to look out the car window as she drove by, worrying she would only see extinction, a brown testament left over from her years of nearly spiritual diligence. I really wish I could have transplanted my roses at least, her mother audibly sighed while driving past during her last visit home. Well, why didn't you, Mom? She inquired, marveling that her mother didn't pluck up the entirety of her gardens while she and her father packed up their lives in that house and moved on to the next. They're just so finicky, her mother responded. I'm not sure if they do well after being uprooted and traveling to the new place. The daughter raised her eyebrows. It's literally less than 2 miles between the houses. They could be pulled up, transported, and replanted in 10 minutes, Mama. You don't think it'd work? Her mother thought about it while she flipped to a different radio station. Maybe so. Well, let's go grab them after this. They were on their way to her grandparents for an obligatory family lunch. Those two are still on their honeymoon, so who's going to stop us? They're definitely as good as dead if we don't. Maybe she had her own doubts about the newlyweds' gardening abilities, too. Laughing, her ever-responsible mother replied, "We can't do that." No matter how badly she wanted to do something, she would never actually do something that resembled anything morally questionable, like theft. Albeit theft of something that was naturally hers. I mean, she had given life to those plants. She knew there would be no convincing her mother of a secret rose heist, so she let it go, silently wondering how many numbered days the plants had left under their new caretakers. She found herself in the same role as observer now, years later, watching him take care of his plants. He had always been so organic, so authentic. As with all other practices in his life, these attributes blended seamlessly into the care of his plants. Rather than an implanted garden or jungle like her mother's, his botanical collection consisted of clay pots, plastic mugs, ceramic containers, and glass jars and bottles. His most recent addition was a rosemary plant, shaped into a miniature Christmas tree and potted in a container wrapped in gold foil, the incarnation of her request that he get something to make it feel like Christmas. Once the holiday season had passed, he arranged it between two of his other plants, both ferns that she had tried to memorize the names of but had inevitably failed in doing so. All available windowsills were claimed by plants. When there were no empty windowsills left, one was imitated by a tall, long table he had situated along the majority of his largest window, and over half a dozen plants populated the edge overlooking the busy city street below in an attempt to collect as much rare Seattle sun as possible. When the sun failed them, as it especially tended to do in the bleak winter months, plant lights beneath the table replicated its effects for the continually rotating placement of plants basking in their glow. The substitutes seemed to work quite effectively, considering none of the plants seemed to suffer during the time she was there. Rather, they seemed to thrive. A hanging plant grew numerous leaves along its vine. A flower was making its way up a stalk in a plant on the table, and the large dragon tree had sprouts coming up in odd places along its winding branches. She watched him care for his family of plants and soon no longer wondered how they did so well in the seemingly harsh environment of his cold downtown apartment. Most of them probably thrived under his care simply because they owed it to him, being castaways he found in the alleys or orphans he had taken in from strangers offering them to new homes because they couldn't cure some simple affliction or care enough for them to begin with. He handled each and every one with disciplined care, just as he treated all other things in his life. He wouldn't take the easy way out by watering them all with a can. Oh no! Lifting them delicately and one at a time, he would stick a finger in them to determine their individual moisture needs before carrying them to the kitchen or the bathtub. In such a way, they would each get all the attention they needed to continue their ambitious survival attempts in their challenging habitat. She sat in a chair in the corner of the kitchen, regularly shifting her focus from the city outside the window behind her to the boy holding plants under the faucet in front of her. She listened contentedly as he lovingly spoke about each of the plants he would come in and out with and explain to her his personal tenets of plant raising. They don't need as much water in the winter, so you have to be careful. Once every 2 weeks or so seems to work for most of these guys, he staunchly narrated. Everything he did was always so confident, a refreshing trait amidst all the blatant and constant self-conscious anxiety so many people oddly extol nowadays. Sure looks like it works to me, she agreed, motioning to the backdrop of healthy plants in her window. Just don't depend on me to know how to do for them. In spite of her mother's guidance, she still couldn't get the green things to cooperate or simply just subsist. He gave her a half smile with one eye squinting, as if to say he doubted she was that helpless. He always had such faith in her abilities, especially ones she was convinced she couldn't fulfill. Such blind faith always got her into so much trouble. He took the small potted plant he was holding in the sink, forcing water droplets to fall into the drain below. A minute passed as he held the plant there to assure the water had quenched all of its needs without drowning the roots. Once satisfied, he returned the plant to its assigned placement in the front window, second spot along the row of 8. He had done all he could for its well-being, and now passed the responsibility of flourishing along to the plant. She would try to bloom for him too. Thank you for listening to Plants by Jessica Yates. Jessica Yates is originally from Arkansas. She dreams of horses, pumps good music, enjoys getting tattoos, and writes in her all-too-rare free time. This week, she lives in Seattle. Next week, she'll decide that when next week gets here. All sounds you hear come from YouTube's recently launched royalty-free audio library. The first tune and last tune is being used under a CC 1.0 Universal Public Domain Dedication license. The second tune also comes from that same library, however it is being used under Creative Commons Attribution license. The song's name is Cattails, Thatched Villagers by Kevin MacLeod, and again is being used under an Attribution 4.0 International CC0 BY 4.0 license. Thank you to Mr. MacLeod for providing us with some wonderful music. That does it for Prose this week. 2 more very sincere thank yous before we leave, though. Thank you to Miss Yates for sharing her story with us. I know that I am looking quite forward to some more in her series of musings from a wandering Southern belle. And thank you to Justin McGee, the creator of the Prose theme song, who became the latest Patreon member to commit to helping the show out at the $10 a month level. Justin, your tunes and your contributions make Prose a better podcast. Lastly, to all those who haven't been paying attention, it's true. The show and I, its creator, will be moving to Brooklyn, New York in the very near future. So as we move forward and you hear different sounds, different echoes, that is just your humble creator slowly moving his small and humble studio from the wilds of northern Massachusetts to the bustling heart of Brooklyn. As you all continue about your day, I hope that you'll remember to love those around you, tell them that you do, and embrace this life as it is, always, stranger than fiction. See you next time, and thanks for listening.